Questions to the Prime Minister. Question number 1, Mr. Tim Yale.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today. This evening I hope to have an audience of Her Majesty the Queen. Later I shall have talks with President Rover of South Korea, who is on an official visit to this country.
Has my right honourable friend noticed, following a 45% increase in real terms in spending on the National Health Service since 1979, that next year, for the first time in British history, spending on health by central government will exceed spending on defence? And does she agree that this is both very timely in the light of recent international developments and also makes absolutely clear which party in this House is genuinely concerned about improving the National Health Service?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend. Next year, the spending on health in real terms will very nearly have doubled since we came into power. There are more doctors, more nurses and more patients being treated. It is a most excellent record. So too, of course, is our record on defence. I noticed that in yesterday's newspaper there was an article by a doctor who had not been of our political persuasion, but who in fact said an examination of each aspect of the health reforms would lead most intelligent and informed people to say that they make sense. He went on to say on health, the leader of the opposition and his colleagues have nothing to offer.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that today's report from the National Audit Office shows that the government sold Rover for at least £60 million less than it was worth? Will the Prime Minister now make a public apology for this gross incompetence?
Mr. Speaker, apart from the year it sold Jaguar, Rover had not made a profit since 1976. It was a major achievement successfully to privatise this company, and the government struck the best deal it believed it could in all the circumstances of the sale.
But, Mr. Speaker, doesn't the Prime Minister recall that this is the second time in 2 years that the government has shortchanged the British public by selling off assets? Mr. Speaker, it happened with Royal Ordnance, it's happening with Rover, and tomorrow it's going to happen on a monstrous scale with the sell-off of water. When is the government going to stop asset stripping the country?
No, Mr. Speaker. Rover Leyland had not made a profit at all, except in the year when it sold Jaguar. It was only able to carry on at all because of a government guarantee to trade creditors and a government guarantee to the banks. The liability building up on the British taxpayer was enormous. It was a very good thing to be able to privatise Rover under those circumstances.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister think that that in any way excuses selling off a company for £60 million less than it was worth?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if it was such a good bargain, why did the TUC or the unions not try to buy it first?
Curtis!
Will my right honourable friend acknowledge that listed as one of those Tory rebels by the Radio 4 programme and having the honour to represent the constituency once represented by the distinguished member who was the father of my honourable friend the member for Clwyd North West, that my constituents and the people of this country demand that she remains as
I think that's not the question I'd expected. I did.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. I'm quite sure that his constituents and he are both right.
Mr. Bob Cryer.
Number 2.
I have at present no plans to do so.
Mr. Cryer.
Does the aspiring President for Life and Prime Minister accept that if she visited West Yorkshire, she'd find extensive anger and resentment against water privatisation? Because millions of people over the years have bought and paid for a comprehensive system of water supply and disposal through the rates. And when items are sold off that people already own, it's regarded as legalised theft. And if the honourable member for Henley had the guts to stand against her, she'd be swept from office and dumped in the garbage of her own policies.
Where is it? Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman is aware, 25% of the water supply industry is already privatised. That even socialist France knows that privatised water is a better deal than nationalised water. That the water privatisation, I believe, will go very successfully indeed, and perhaps, therefore, we had better wait and see so that we can pontificate in the light of the facts instead of what the honourable gentleman said.
Mr. Gill, Christopher Gill. Christopher Gill.
In view of the dramatic events unfolding in Eastern Europe,
Order. West Yorkshire. Mr. James Wallace.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Wallace.
Mr. Speaker, since in her interview last night the Prime Minister said that in matters of government we should retain for ourselves the things we do best ourselves, will she give the people of Scotland greater opportunities to govern ourselves?
I believe the people of Scotland are best served by the presence of the United Kingdom in the European community and by the continuance of the European community as a country with maximum cooperation between sovereign nations.
Sir Michael Patrick McNair Wilson.
I refer my honourable friend to the reply which I gave some moments.
Sir Patrick McNair Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, may I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend on the successful meeting which she had with President Bush at Camp David last Saturday.
Order!
House, that there is agreement between Britain, the United States, and our European allies on the best approach to the historic changes taking place in Eastern Europe.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, over a period of 4.5 hours, we had excellent discussions with President Bush at Camp David last week, which showed a substantial identity with President Bush last week, as which showed a substantial identity of view on the way ahead between East-West relations. The most important thing, Mr. Speaker, is to secure democracy in all the East European countries and throughout the Soviet Union, and not to raise the question of borders until that is complete. And then when that is complete, there will, of course, be a different world, and all sorts of things are possible in the way ahead. And in the meantime, NATO must be kept intact and our defence sure. and negotiations between the Warsaw Pact and NATO on reductions of armaments must continue, giving us a basis of security for these enormous changes to take place to advance it.
Mr. Donald Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, why are there now many more young people begging on the streets of London and our big cities?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is aware that if young people are in difficulty, they can claim income support and housing benefits. If between the age of 16...
Order!
Mr. Speaker, if between the age of 16 and 18 there are more youth training places available than there are young people to fill them, and this government is of the view that it is far better for young people to take a training than be idle, and if young people are in difficulty and in hardship, there are special grants available.
Mr. Michael Jack.
Sir.
I defer my honourable friend's reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Speaker, what advice would my right honourable friend give to the Vauxhall car workers at their plant in Elmsire Port in Cheshire, who now, because of the action of Labour's acolytes, the Transport and General Workers Union, face the prospect of losing a £200 million engine plant development because of a damaging, selfish inter-union dispute on working practices?
Mr. Speaker, that good jobs and good prospects come from working all investment equipment to its maximum extent, that it's time for restrictive practices to go out of the window so that our labour costs become lower, our productivity higher, and that we're able to compete with car factories in Europe and in Japan and in the United States. I believe that most ordinary trade unionists know that, and I hope they'll pass that message to their trade union leaders.
Mr. Charles Radice.
Could the right honourable lady tell the House whether she thinks there is a positive advantage for Britain joining the exchange rate mechanism?
Mr. Speaker, may I refer the honourable gentleman to the speech which I made at Madrid, which laid down specific conditions to be met before we join the exchange rate mechanism. The first one is that inflation must be got down. The second one is that stage one of the law, with the necessary directives and freeing up the financial services of other countries, plus freedom of capital movements, plus abolition of foreign exchange control, must be met by the other member countries as it is being met by us, and of course that we get fair competition between countries. I believe that that is mostly accepted in all parts of this House as the right and proper way to proceed.
Mr. Ivor Stanbrook.
Number 6, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I refer my honourable friend to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Ivor Stanbrook.
In response to some fancied labour shortage, the government appears to want to encourage more mothers of young children to go out to work. Would it not be wiser, for the sake of the care, happiness and fostering of our children and of society, for the mothers of young children to be encouraged to stay at home?
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend is aware, that is for the mothers themselves to decide. Yes, we do in fact need many more women at work. It is for the mothers to decide whether they can make full and proper arrangements for the children, or whether they should wait until later when the children are off hand and return to work. It is for their own decision. As my honourable friend knows, that from next April the taxation of married women will change, and they'll be taxed separately, which will be of a great advantage to them and enable them to make their own choices.
Reverend Martin Smith.
Would the Prime Minister comment on recent developments when the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland looked forward to entering into discussions with Sinn Féin, whose aim is the British withdrawal from Northern Ireland, and the recent weekend statement of the Cardinal Fee, who asked for that intention to be declared?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member is aware, Northern Ireland is and remains part of the United Kingdom. That is the wish of the majority of her people and could only be changed if the wish of the majority changed so that they didn't want to stay with the United Kingdom. It would be a matter not only for them but also for honourable members of this House. I hope and believe that Northern Ireland will remain a part of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Timothy Kirkhope.
Number 7, sir.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Kirkhope.
Would my right honourable friend not agree that the recent announcement that the National Health Service Executive and the Social Security Directorate is to move to Leeds, together with 2,000 members of staff, does that not show the government's true commitment to the interests of the people of the north of England? And does it not also prove further that Leeds and the area of West Yorkshire around it is drawing people like a magnet to its area?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend that the move of the Health Service Directorate and the Social Security Directorate to Leeds is very much to be welcomed. I believe it will give a better service at less cost, and that I believe they're quite fortunate to be able to be going to that part of the world. The facilities they will have are very much better than they would have had in London, and I hope it will add greatly to the attractions of Leeds for other people who wish to move there.
I have a point of order, Mr. Jack Straw.
Mr.